Claude Swanson's live broadcasts on his book, Science of the Soul, The Afterlife and The Shift. This is the Caritas Consciousness Project, and I am Gloria Guedu, your host. And I will say a few things about Dr. Swanson. He was educated as a physicist at MIT and Princeton University. For more than 25 years, interspersed with his conventional professional career in applied physics, Dr. Swanson has pursued investigations into unconventional physics. His principal interest has been unified field theory, the so-called theory of everything, which could explain the universe at the deepest possible level. This has led him to investigate many aspects of the paranormal, which appear to be completely real phenomena that violate our present science. Paranormal phenomena, which have now been proven in the laboratory in many cases, offers a window into the deeper universe, the mysteries of consciousness, and unlock new forces and principles which conventional science has only begun to glimpse. Dr. Swanson likes to address questions at the end of his presentations, but if you have a question during the presentation, there's a little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you can type in the question there. And at the end of the presentation, we will read the questions and Dr. Swanson will answer them. So welcome and enjoy, and I will switch over to Claude Swanson.
Hello, everyone. And so I think today's chapter is about reincarnation. If you recall the other foregoing chapters, there's lots and lots of evidence that we do reincarnate, that the soul is really our real identity. It's the part that lives forever, and it is the part that is our essential identity. So when you go out of body, for example, in a near-death experience or an OBE, you see the world through the eyes of that out-of-body spirit, that energy form that can travel around very rapidly. It's usually invisible, although some clairvoyants can see them, but it is really the center of our consciousness, and it is what undergoes the reincarnations from lifetime to lifetime. And this energy form also stores our memories and our knowledge. So as we grow through our experiences, that's where the memory is kept. So we reincarnate to continue to learn. And we actually have a lot of planning and a lot of thought that goes into our next lifetime to make sure that we learn the lessons that we need to learn next. That might have to do with karma, repaying someone that we've hurt, perhaps in a past life, or learn some lesson that we haven't had a chance to learn yet. So incarnation comes from many different reasons. So I'm going to start the slideshow now. I think I hit the share button here. I'm hoping this is right. Gloria will tell me if it's not. And I'm hoping that everyone is seeing the first slide there, Science of the Soul, the Afterlife and The Shift.
Yeah,
good. You got it? Okay, good. So lecture 7, and this corresponds to chapter 6 in the book, Do It with the Mouse. So my background, you've seen this before many times probably. It's pretty much a conventional physicist's background, as you know, and I wanted to know how the universe really worked, but I felt that there was something left out of the mainstream education. And remote viewing was my first clue. As you continue learning and keeping your eyes open, you come up with all kinds of different phenomena that our Western science can't explain. And the afterlife experiences, the phenomena that happen in seances, that happen in near-death experiences. There's lots and lots of cases where phenomena happen that just totally defy our Western standard textbook physics. And so I've really been trying to understand what really goes on and how we can expand our theory of physics to include these higher dimensions and these deeper abilities. I mean, one of the problems with Western culture is that we put so much store in science, and science is very materialistic in the West. It looks upon matter as being the center of everything. And so therefore, when the body dies, the matter goes away. You bury the person, or you incinerate them or whatever. The body is no longer around. And so the person will ask, well, how can there be anything after that? But what we find is there are energy forms that preserve the intelligence, they preserve the consciousness. They really make up the center of who we are, and they make up the soul. And that's where the energy and the memories and the knowledge is stored. And that's when you say I, when you think about who you are and where you are, it's that center of that soul, that energy of the consciousness is really where you're located. So it's a little bit different than the old materialistic view, but we have to come to something more like this new view, this deeper view, to understand the afterlife and reincarnation. My books, you can, as you probably know, my website is synchronizeduniverse.com. You can buy the books there, or email me at claudeswanson@gmail.com to purchase the books. So reincarnation, let's go through some of the items that are elements of that. One of the first stories that I describe in my book happened to me when I was just starting to write. My first book, Synchronized Universe, had just been published, and the first box of these books was coming to my parents' house in Gretna, Virginia. And I was kind of anxious. I hadn't published any books before. And growing up in a small Bible Belt town in Southern Virginia, and my book was about the paranormal, I didn't know how people were going to think of me. I didn't know what they would say. Paranormal is kind of a no-no topic for lots of people in some areas of the country. It so happened that the person who delivered the box of books to my parents' home was someone I'd known all my life. He was a deacon or an elder in our church that I'd grown up in, the Methodist Church. And he also ran the UPS delivery service and the gas station, typical of a small town. He brought the books to the house, and he said he didn't know what it was when he first saw it, that he thought it said poison. But he looked at it again and it said Poseidia. What's Poseidia? And I explained that was the name of my publishing company. And he said, well, what's the book about? And I was a little nervous at that point. I hadn't talked to anybody in Gretna, Virginia, about this book before. And here I was talking to one of the deacons of our church, and I explained, well, it's about the paranormal. And I was afraid he might be making the sign of the cross, and, I didn't know what they might do in response. But he blew me away. He said, well, is that kind of like past life reincarnation? And I said, yes. And it turned out that the preacher, our preacher in the town, in our church, had a habit, a practice of doing past life reincarnations on people. I didn't know that. About 100 people in the town had gone through regressions, hypnotherapy and regressions, including his wife. And his wife, when he regressed her, she went into a past life in Germany where she began speaking fluent German. which she never had any training at all in this lifetime with. So it became a famous case. And I'll talk about that first here, because not only did it blow me away, and the fact that he had hypnotized 100 people in my small town, but that Dr. Ian Stevenson, one of the world's foremost authorities on reincarnation, had spent 5 years doing research on her and this case. So I'll just start out, first of all, to note that lots of cultures have believed in reincarnation over the years. In fact, the West, Christianity and Western culture, as we think of it in America, is one of the few that doesn't accept reincarnation. Most religions of the world do. Even in Christianity, there's evidence that it was taught and it was believed at an early time, and it was suppressed when the Catholic Church formed their definitive version of the Bible. But here are a couple of quotes that are often cited just to support this idea. One is by Jesus in Matthew in the Bible, where he says, "Verily I say unto you, among those that are born of women, there have been none greater than John the Baptist. And if you could understand what I say, he is actually Elias, who was predicted to appear. He who has ears, let him hear." Now, this is believed to be an edited version of the actual passage that was original, but he's still comparing a person in their present time period to someone in the past who was mentioned by the prophets. So he's making a connection there. In the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about it much more explicitly. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from childhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. And Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, "Many lives, Arjuna, you and I have lived. I remember them all, but thou dost not." And unfortunately, most of us are in the same situation as Arjuna. We don't remember our past lives, but we can recover them through good hypnosis. Many regression hypnotherapists are able to get people back and remember parts of their past lives, and it can actually cure illnesses when you do that. One person who discovered that for himself was Dr. Brian Weiss, a traditionally educated Harvard PhD who was using hypnotherapy as one form of psychotherapy, but he would only regress people back to their childhood. He figured the problems all started with early childhood, and he would take them back and look for some traumatic event. And once he identified the event, usually that would solve their problem and they would be cured. But one particular client he had was named Catherine, who he kept working with her, and he had no success. She had a profound fear of drowning, a profound fear of water, and he couldn't seem to locate the event that had caused her fear. So after 6 months, she was not better at all. Now, usually he was able to cure people in only a few months. He had a very good cure rate, very, very successful. So out of frustration one day, he says to her, go to the event that caused the trauma. In hypnosis, he says this. And she begins describing herself as an 18-year-old girl standing on top of a pyramid in South America. And she describes in great detail the ceremonies that are going on. She's living in a village, something like a Mayan or Incan village, at a time that was several thousand years ago. But she was not very well educated in this lifetime, didn't know a lot about different cultures, but in this particular regression, she was able to describe in great detail aspects of the culture, aspects of the beliefs. He knew this was not knowledge that she could be making up. What was remarkable about it is that the next time she came for her next session, she was cured. Her fear of water had gone away. It turned out that in that previous incarnation, when he takes her through to her death, in that lifetime, there was a flood. And it was a huge flood, and that flood is what killed her. And that's what caused this fear of water that had been stuck with her for thousands of years until this event. So he found that by leading her through the event, the issue went away. And that's usually the pattern in psychotherapy. But this proved that he was getting at the core issue that was causing the problem. The more remarkable thing that happened is that at the end of the session, her voice changes. She starts talking in a very deep, authoritative voice and begins talking about other things that he's not asking her about. It's with another personality and another intelligence who he calls the masters, who began describing information about Brian Weiss's own life that they knew events that had happened in his life that had profoundly affected him. And she begins talking about that in profound detail. One of the most painful experiences in Brian Weiss's life had been the death of his firstborn son, who was born with a birth defect. His heart was connected backwards, was oriented improperly, and he only lived a few days, and then he died. And it was very, very distressing to Brian. And this voice, this master, knew about that. And he also says that Brian Weiss's father had died of a heart problem, and he begins comparing the two. He also knew that Brian Weiss's daughter had been named after Weiss's father. He had a lot of personal details he began describing about Weiss himself. So Catherine went from being just the patient to being this voice, this channel, if you like, for some higher intelligence. And afterwards, Weiss begins looking forward to these sessions because he would was often given information that he'd never encountered before that validated for him the reality of reincarnation and past life regression. And his education was as a left-brained scientific type. He didn't really believe in past lives. He'd never tried to regress anybody into a past life until it happened more or less by accident with Catherine. So he became a regression hypnotherapist by accident. And in the process, Catherine also tells him that in past lives, he's been put to death. He was imprisoned and put to death in earlier eras because of his belief in reincarnation. So it's a very, very interesting and complicated story. But when you read it and read his credentials, it's impressive that this is a real phenomenon. There are many therapists nowadays that do use past life regression and find amazing cures for things that otherwise would be thought incurable. Anyway, there are lots of people who have learned about this, but it's the whole idea of the soul and of how we grow and learn from generation to generation and from incarnation to incarnation is an important part of how we advance. Here's a quote from Arthur Powell, who wrote a comprehensive book on the causal body and the ego This is based on the information from the yogis and Hindu wisdom. He says the development of the ego is thus the object of the whole process of descent into matter. In other words, we come into matter to develop our egos, to learn. The ego assumes the veils of matter precisely because through them he's able to receive vibrations to which he can respond, so that his latent faculties may thereby be unfolded. In other words, we're in the physical to learn. We come here to learn lessons that would be much more difficult to learn if we stayed in the higher planes. So anyway, when Jimmy Hunt, the elder in my church, tells me about past life regression, and that our preacher had actually been doing it in my hometown, it pretty much blew me away. Not only that, but he told me that Ian Stevenson, the most famous reincarnation expert that I knew about, had been coming down to Gretna for 5 years to do research on this case. That was totally unexpected. Here's what Ian Stevenson said about this particular case. Gretchen was the name of this woman in this past life in Germany. She was an 18-year-old when she was killed during a civil war that went on there. But Stevenson says, I consider the case of Gretchen one of the most important parapsychological cases that I have studied. I shall try to explain why I believe this. Of one aspect, I can speak with absolute certainty. During sessions at which Gretchen manifested, Dolores J., the lady, through the personality of Gretchen, unquestionably spoke German. Moreover, she spoke it in an intelligent way, by which I mean she gave sensible answers in German to questions put to her in German. And Stevenson also did a lot of background research to see if there's any chance that she'd ever had any training in German. And neither she nor her husband had ever attended a German class, nor even knew of anyone who did. So he says, my inquiries may have been tedious and vexatious, but at least they permit me now to say confidently that I'm convinced that she had no normal knowledge of German before the first appearance of Gretchen. I think this is equally true of Carol J., her husband. So this is an amazing case, and it turned out that over time he involved experts in German history, and a lot of other people were involved in investigating this particular case. And what he found is that he was able to track down the location in Germany where she lived and the events that were surrounding what led to her death. Unfortunately, and this happened before he ever came to Gretna, the town I grew up in, but even in Ohio, where he first was a preacher, he found that a lot of the townspeople didn't really feel comfortable with what he was doing. And he received a lot of pushback and because of his practice. I never saw that where I grew up, but these small towns still have a belief that some of these practices are to be feared. So it's just one of those strange phenomena when you start learning about aspects of the soul, that the belief system of many people has been shaped by their religion or their culture, and there can be friction there. So I'm just, these are slides that just are kind of going over the basic research. There are a bunch of papers that he published about this case. And I think for me, when people ask, well, is reincarnation real? You say, what kind of evidence do you have for it? And one of the best kinds of evidence is if you can speak a language that you've never been trained in, never been exposed to, and you can speak it fluently, that's a pretty good indication that you have a connection with that language through some other means, that the reincarnation is real. It's called xenoglossy to the experts who study this. Lots of people throughout history have believed in reincarnation and have taken it very seriously. And some of the most famous scholars in our society, for example, have talked about it. Henry Ford, for example, believed that a lot of the abilities he had as a businessman and an inventor came from past life lessons that he'd come in with. But here are a few quotes just to show you how many famous people do believe in reincarnation or have believed. And these are things that are not normally publicized, but it's amazing how widespread it is. Walt Whitman, the great poet, said, "I know I am deathless. No doubt I have died myself 10,000 times before. I laugh at what you call dissolution, and I know the amplitude of time." Benjamin Franklin said, "I look upon death to be as necessary to the Constitution as sleep. We shall rise refreshed in the morning." Mark Twain said, "I have been born more times than anybody except Krishna." And Henry Ford said, "I adopted the theory of reincarnation when I was 26. Genius is experience. Some think that it's a gift or a talent, but it is the fruit of long experience in many lives." A couple other ones. Goethe said, "As long as you're not aware of the continual law of die and be again, you're merely a vague guest on a dark earth." Nietzsche said, "Live so thou mayest desire to live again. That is thy duty, for in any case thou wilt live again." And Gandhi said, "I cannot think of permanent enmity between man and man. And believing as I do in the theory of reincarnation, I live in the hope that if not in this birth, in some other birth, I shall be able to hug all of humanity in a friendly embrace." And General George Patton said, "So as through a glass and darkly, the age-long strife I see, where I fought in many guises, but many times, many names, but always me." And if anyone saw the movie about Patton and his life, there's a memorable scene in there where he takes Karl Malden to an ancient battlefield where the Romans, then the Carthaginians fought 2,000 years ago, and he leads him through the details of the battle, blow by blow, because he remembers being there in that past life. And he also believed it made him a better general because he had all that experience in those past battles. And here's some more quotes that I have in the book, and I won't go over all of them with you, but just suffice it to say that reincarnation has been a staple of so many religions and cultures throughout history that we in the West are one of the few who seem to resist the whole idea. And once you look into it more deeply, you find that it actually makes a lot of sense. The next way we have learned about past lives is through regression hypnosis, in the same way that Reverend Carol J. in the last section regressed his wife, so she was able to remember and re-enter a previous lifetime. Many therapists are trained to do this. Dolores Cannon is one who's well known, written dozens of books about it, and thousands of people have been regressed by her. Michael Newton is another one. He's written two really wonderful books encapsulating what he's learned, the principles of afterlife, the principles of reincarnation, and what he's learned. And one of the things he says to sum it up is, do we have to reincarnate? No, we don't have to come here. No one is forced to do anything. You're not forced by anyone or by karma to incarnate. On the contrary, souls up there are clamoring to incarnate. Souls in spirit are like, I'm so excited. I can't wait to get back down there and mix it up. And he didn't start out believing what he does now about incarnation, but he said it started off with one client who asked him if he could try to use hypnosis to get rid of this physical pain he had. It was in his side, and he had it all his life. The doctors couldn't find any reason for this pain, so Newton gave him a command to go to the origin of the pain. And the man jumped into a past life as a soldier in World War I. He was a British sergeant. It was the first Battle of the Somme. I think it was 1916. Newton says, I couldn't believe what was happening to me. This fellow was lying in the mud. I mean, of course, he's lying on a couch in a hypnotic state, but he's describing it very vividly in real time as he experiences it. This fellow was lying in the mud and groaning, and I was trying to get his arm patch an infantry unit because I'm an historian. I was more interested in verifying the British unit that he claimed to be with and a number of other facts instead of gently desensitizing this horrible trauma he was going through. In other words, instead of being a doctor and trying to fix the man's pain, he was trying to be a scientist and get the unit patch and other information. He could track down the case and see if it was a real case. Eventually, I did do that. And when it was all over, he was feeling better already. And he called me a few days later and said there was no more pain. My wife really wants to thank you. And Newton says, I wasn't satisfied with that. I contacted the British War Office and the Imperial Museum in London to find out if this British sergeant ever existed, and if there was such a person and this particular unit that he described in the 4th Corps. And sure enough, there was such a person, and he died in 1916. So from that case, I began taking past life cases. So I came kicking and screaming into this movement. And that gives you a glimpse of the kind of character of the people who have given us some of the most important information about past lives. These are scientists in their whole attitude and their mindset. He wants to know if it's real or not, and he compares what he gets in hypnosis with other objective data, and he finds that the two do match up. So there's something very real about past life regression. During an interview with Martini, there's a nice little video of this interview with Newton. He said, it didn't matter whether a client came to me with a deep religious belief or a lack of belief in anything, or any philosophical persuasion in between. Once we had them in deep hypnosis, they all told me the same thing. And that's the beautiful thing, that hypnosis really kind of puts our logical mind to sleep, the part that tries to be critical and analytical and figure things out based on our belief systems. And that part gets put to sleep in hypnosis. And the deeper part of us that remembers the actual events is able to come to the fore and relive these events that are causing these deep traumas. So Newton discovered that he could verify factually key aspects of clients' past lives. And more importantly, when he identified these experiences, the man was healed of his present day health complaints. And this is what Brian Weiss also discovered. This is the amazing thing about past life therapy, regression hypnosis, that when you re-experience the trauma that is causing the problem, by getting access to it, it cures it. And so it goes away. Its problems vanish. And that's a good test whether you've really found the real event, the real cause, or not. So according to Newton, who's treated over 7,000 patients, we are fully conscious between lives. In other words, in our lifetimes, in our afterlives, we are totally conscious beings. Our soul, the center of our personality, is totally aware. And this information also comes through in lots of other different ways that we talk to spirits or communicate with spirits in the afterlife. In my book, I have about 10 different methods by which we've gotten information from spirits in the afterlife. And some of them are quite scientific, quite hardcore, objective. And what he's saying here is the same thing, that these spirits are, that is the center of our personality, of our consciousness. So we remain conscious during that period. That's how we learn. The time we spend in the afterlife is a time of great learning, and a lot of what goes on in those periods is studying and making plans and learning about things that we need to work on. So what Newton also has learned is that we are aware of all our previous lives, and with the help of our spirit guides and soulmates, we decide on which life we'll lead together in the next incarnation. They claim to have free will between lives. We choose when and where, and even if, to return to life on Earth. Older, wiser souls may choose a more difficult life in order to help others spiritually. So there are many examples of reincarnation cases, but this is one of them that I really enjoyed reading about because it's about a little boy whose name was Christian Haupt, who, when he was just 2 or 3 years old, his mother would be putting him to bed at night, and he'd be talking to her, and he would say, "I used to be a tall baseball player." And you try to correct him, and his mother did try to correct him. He'd say, "No, you mean when you will be a tall baseball player." He stomps his foot and insists that he was one in the past when he was big. And he knows things that no 2-year-old should know. In fact, he knows things most people don't know. He tells his mom that when he was big and played baseball, the team didn't travel to the games on airplanes. They mostly went on the train. At the age of 2, little Christian Haupt could not yet read, but he was obsessed with playing baseball. He pestered his mother, Kathy Bird, or anyone else available to play baseball with him, and he loved hitting styrofoam balls with his little bat. He was so adept at baseball, even at the tender age of 2, that his mother made a short YouTube video of his talents. It led to a part in an Adam Sandler movie, That's My Boy, in which he played a toddler baseball prodigy. As a 2-year-old, he said things like, "When I was a tall baseball player, tall like Daddy, I used to stay in hotels almost every night. And when he was being buckled into his seat for his first plane ride, he said, when I was big, I didn't wear seat belts, and I drank alcohol." At bedtime, he regaled his sister and mother with stories of when I was big. Christian insisted that he used to play for the New York Yankees. One of his teammates was Babe Ruth, for whom he held a grudge. To test some of his stories, his mother showed him a team photograph from that era. Christian picked out Babe Ruth immediately. "There's dumb Babe Ruth," he exclaimed. And when his mother asked if Christian was in the picture, he pointed to a stocky man with dimples and a big grin. "That's me when I was big," said Christian. It was a photograph of Lou Gehrig. Oh, what happened here? As her book proceeds, this is written by his mother about her research, trying to figure out what really happened with her son. She also went through past life regressions, and remarkably, she found that she had been his mother in a previous life, and her son had been Lou Gehrig. And it turns out that he had requested that in this lifetime that she come back and be his mother again. There are lots of really touching and remarkable things about this book, but the whole principle that once we start being able to talk, which can start at age 2 or thereabouts, the children often remember their past lives with a clarity that starts to fade as they get older. That's what Ian Stevenson found with the thousands of cases in India. He would go to children who remembered past lives, also at the same age group. They had a lot of details and clarity, would interview them and could actually track down their past life, the village they lived in, the family they lived in, and compare and check out the accuracy of their memory. And remarkably enough, the details checked out. In this particular case with Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth, it is known that there was a falling out between the two of them. They were teammates on the Yankees, but there was a falling out at some point over a woman, and that was really the key to the whole dispute. But it's a delightful book and a wonderful example of how real these past life experiences can be in affecting our personality in the present life. Another example comes from the Tibetan monk Sogyal Rinpoche, who in his book, The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, tells about a man named Arthur Flowerdew, an elderly man who lived in Norfolk, England. And, you know, he's getting up in years, but all of his life, he had these visions of a great city surrounded by a desert. He would go down to the seashore, and he would remember these images. They were quite vivid. And he saw a temple carved into a cliff, and had described this to many people. He had no idea why he was seeing these images. Then many, many years later, while watching a BBC documentary, they showed the city of Petra in Jordan. And he immediately saw that that was a city in his vision. He knew so much about Petra. He had so many details that he was invited to fly there to see it firsthand. An expert on Petrus, interviewed him on camera about his visions before he went. And they showed him different puzzles and structures and questions that no one had been able to figure out. And he could explain what each thing was and what its purpose had been. And he baffled the archaeologists who were experts on Petrus by his knowledge of the details of what was there. He recognized particular locations in the city, and there was one particular room that he identified as a guard room where he had served as a soldier 2,000 years earlier. So as Rinpoche says, he filled in details, and a lot of it is very consistent with known archaeological and historical files. It would require a mind very different from his to be able to sustain a fabric of deception on the scale of his memories, at least those he's reported to me. I don't think he's a fraud. I don't think he has the capacity to be a fraud on this scale. And the reason I'm pointing out some of these little stories is because they show that the very wide variety of people from different walks of life, different experiences, still have memories that come from previous lives, and they're still bleeding into our present life. They're affecting how we think about things, how we feel, and there's a continuity in our soul from lifetime to lifetime that comes through. Here's another a boy who Ian Stevenson studied. And this is a typical case of a child who, when he's 2 or 3 years old, remembers things from his previous life. And here it says, when he was walking down the street with his grandmother in Lebanon, he rushed over to a man they passed on the sidewalk. He greeted him and said, "You were my neighbor." This case was later investigated by Dr. Ian Stevenson as part of his research into evidence for reincarnation. And so Imad was investigated in great detail, and he found 47 different facts that corresponded, 44 out of 47 that corresponded very closely to what he had described in his lifetime. So these were examples that where he would actually find the town and find the family where the boy remembered having lived in the past life and could verify that they were real. So in addition, he recalled other items that were very personal regarding this past life identification, such as the last words spoken on his deathbed. So these are all just examples of how widespread the effect of previous incarnations is. Jenny Cockle is another one. Gloria was telling me before the talk tonight that there is a nice movie about her life that dramatizes this, but she had memories and dreams of a previous lifetime. And she recalled that her name was Mary, and she drew maps of the village. And she used to always want to dress up on Sunday morning because in her previous life, they always went to Sunday school and in church. But the parents in this lifetime were not churchgoers. So they were kind of puzzled that she was always preparing for church on Sunday morning. But it's just one more example of how these things connect. In her childhood as Jenny, she had vivid memories of other things. She remembered the walls and the windows of a hospital room. She remembered scenes from a village, the interior of a cottage and a small lane next to it. Some recollections would come as dreams. These nighttime dreams were bad, but I was able to recall other times in Mary's life, usually during daytime. As it turns out, when she fully recovers the memory of this lifetime, she died at a fairly young age as a mother. She had 8 children, and she did not want to go because she didn't want to leave them without a mother. And it was agonizing to her. It was probably why she kept being pulled back by these memories into this lifetime. She said, I could remember an older son who was getting quite tall and may have been as old as 13. He was a little soldier, confident, very open and straightforward, a good judge of situations, and not afraid of being gentle. As Jenny grew older, these troubling, vivid memories of another lifetime drew her to see a regression hypnotherapist in hopes she could recover more memories of that past life. She was troubled especially by the thought that she had left her children too early in that lifetime. It was the grief and loss through death that caused the tears. It was too soon to go, much too soon to leave the children. In her past life regression, she remembered that her last name had been Sutton. She had 8 children and lived a life of great poverty and hardship. The most traumatic aspect for her was her early death in a hospital in 1932 because she knew she was leaving her children motherless. She found herself feeling guilty about abandoning them in this way. Her regressions uncovered so many details that she was able to go back to Ireland and locate the house where she had lived and to find some of her children who were still living. The maps that she had drawn in childhood corresponded accurately to the layout of the village, which helped her to find the house. Her detailed memories of each of her children and the names of some of the streets also helped. When she finally did unite in this lifetime with her now grown children from a previous life, it was a powerful experience for all of them. And as I'm reading this, I'm remembering that I think I did see that movie where I saw a documentary about her life years ago. This is the one that's referred to here. In April 1994, a feature from ABC News 2020 was able to sketch the room. So they had Jenny and took her over there and had her describe what she would see before they got there. And she was able to sketch the room in the hospital in Dublin where she had died and sent this to the producer of the show 5 days before going to Ireland. She had not visited this place, the Rotunda Maternity Hospital in Dublin, in her present lifetime, but she was able to describe accurately the details of the floor plan and the physical appearance of the hospital at the time she had died there. And what I recall in the documentary is you see she meets her children who are now adults. Some of them are older than she is now. One of her sons towers over her, but they still remember her. They recognize the energy. They recognize her. And it's very moving to watch their reunion after all these years. So there's that past life on Brian Weiss that I lost a while ago. Another person who is very wise and very advanced in knowledge, who I've learned a lot from, is Michael Tamura. Tamura is I would call him an adept almost. He remembers all of his lifetimes, I think, and he teaches psychic development and meditation and other spiritual practices. He's a Japanese American in this lifetime, but what he will tell you about is that he remembers all of his lives, and his most recent past life was as a little girl in Hiroshima, Japan. He said that he chose that life to be the daughter in that family because he was advanced and he knew about the bomb. In the afterlife, time doesn't have much meaning. People can look into the past and the future with great ease. And his job was to be present there when the bomb went off, because he knew the souls were going to be disoriented. The people would die so suddenly without warning, they wouldn't know what to make of it. And when people die without preparation like that, and without any expectation of where they are or what's happened to them, it can make finding the afterlife or progressing on into the higher planes of the afterlife more difficult. They have to orient themselves first, unless there's a wise person present who can act as a guide and give them direction. So Michael was in this family as a little girl to be present there when the bomb went off. And all of the relatives and the neighbors, he could see them in spirit form after the explosion and help guide them and calm them down and help show them how to proceed into the afterlife in a much more comfortable, orderly way. He has given nice lectures about his experiences. Someone who has had that many incarnations that he is aware of and is that advanced has experiences other people don't normally see. For example, when he was young, he could see auras, has always been able to see auras. And he didn't even know that it was unusual to see auras. But over time, he's learned to sort of fit in with the rest of us, but he's a wonderful teacher. Here are his own words. He says, "My prior lifetime was during the big flash in Hiroshima, the atomic bomb. I was a 7-year-old girl in Japan. You know how people always say, go to the light? I love having a blast. The reason I did it that way was because of what I did after I died that was much, much more important. So I could work on this plane with people who couldn't move on after that blast because of the shock of vaporizing your body. It doesn't have anything to do with the soul, but if you're not prepared, you can go into shock, into terror. You go into confusion, and you can't go to the other light. You are stuck on this earthly light. So that's why he chose that incarnation. So there were a bunch of souls who lost their body just like that. It's not like it blew up. It's just gone. Prior to that lifetime, I had 2 lifetimes as a Tibetan monk, and I studied, I meditated, and I learned many things about how to die. You've heard of the Tibetan Book of the Dead? We practiced that stuff. And so when I came in and I chose to be this little girl, I died with my mother of that lifetime because I didn't want anyone sitting around grieving for losing this cute little girl. So with me was everyone who cared about me, and we all went separate ways. I just needed to be here to do my job. And I think that gives you some glimpse of the level of spirit of Michael, that the service, even on this high level of the spirit plane, is first and foremost with him. The amount of work that was done on a spiritual level had much to do with how fast people healed. The same with 9/11. There were more angels, more healing guides, and some of us who get out of the body and do healing work on the other side, so to speak, gathered together during that time period. There is still residual trauma and pain, but the speed at which the healing took place was phenomenal. So we are working. A lot of you are doing a lot of healing work when you go to sleep at night. As I grew up, I worked with larger scale disasters like tsunamis, earthquakes. By the time I became an adult, I started teaching. I started teaching when I was 21. So for almost 40 years, every single night when I go to bed, I go to work. So you can say I sleep on my job every night, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Your spirit, there's no end. Most of you know it doesn't end when you die. So what is death and dying as a soul? So Michael also says we learn a great deal between our lifetimes, that our training appears to be overseen by higher spirits. He describes many of these who help him and are part of his own set of guides and teachers. And it's amusing to listen to him describe how they look. They're quite different from each other. They each have their own specialties. But it's sort of a glimpse of how we can all hope to evolve as we grow over time. There have been lots of scientists and psychotherapists who are also using past life regression now because it is so powerful. You can fix things that could not be touched by any other method. Edith Fiore is one who has written several books about her experiences with past life regression. She says, in my work with reincarnation theory, I'm finding there is not one aspect of character or human behavior that cannot be better understood through an examination of past life events. She was raised in a Dutch Reformed Protestant in a rural area. She does not recall ever being taught or hearing that we can live more than one lifetime. Quite to the contrary, she was raised with the belief that we have only one life. In college, she became an agnostic, as many of us do, more compatible with the scientific outlook. I spent studying psychology either in college or grad school, but not even the word reincarnation was used. In her years of practice as a psychologist in Miami and California, time again she witnessed how people's present problems stem from subconscious factors buried in the subconscious mind. She found that conventional psychotherapy is excruciatingly slow. The hypnosis can speed things up. In 1955, and then 1958, the British and American Medical Associations sanctioned the use of hypnosis and suggested that medical schools begin to include it in their curriculum. So it was that recent that hypnosis was allowed in medical training. But during that time, she has had hundreds of patients that have gone through reincarnation, past life regression, and had successful results. And it's just one of many examples of how widespread this is becoming today. Adepts and masters in ancient traditions have known about reincarnation for a long time. By going into altered states, they can access the higher planes of the afterlife, where we're spending most of our time between lives. So they have direct experience for what those planes are like. In terms of understandings of a little theory or concept of how it's all structured, this diagram was done by George Meek, a famous past life and afterlife researcher. And it gives a little cartoon rendition of understanding the afterlife. You could think of it as a multi-story department store. When you go in on the bottom level, with planet Earth, you enter the lower floor of the department store, and there are many elevators, and they go up to different heights, and most of them probably go to the lower astral plane or the middle astral plane, or a few of the higher astral plane, or the purgatory or hell, the darker levels. But it's all depending on the vibration of our soul, as which one we are consistent with. That will tell us what level we get off at and where we end up going that's resonant with our level of development at this time. And we'll stay in that plane for some length of time, however much time is needed to learn the lessons for that plane. Then we may get on the elevator again and go up again or down again. Reincarnation would involve getting down, going back to the earth as another person, incarnating again, having more lessons, more experiences. And as we solve the issues in that particular lifetime, we may go up to a higher plane next time. And the goal eventually is to graduate beyond those lower floors of the astral planes, the middle, the astral, even the highest astral plane. Eventually, when we've worked out all of our psychological issues, our emotional issues, then we can drop the emotional body. There's a part of the soul, they say, that stores those emotions, these memories that have to do with our emotional makeup. When we've worked out all of our issues, then that body can be dropped away, and we can be free to move into a higher plane, a higher vibration, which is depicted here as the next to the top floor, the causal and the mental planes. And there's actually several levels in those planes, but some people call that the true heaven. It may take thousands or even millions of years before people have worked through all their emotional issues, so they're ready to go into those higher planes. Yogananda talks about the celebration that his students would go through when they graduated to those planes and drop the astral body. So it's all a process of learning the lessons in each level, and as you learn them, you can move to higher planes. Eventually, God, if you want to call it that, the highest planes are called the celestial planes, by many other names. They're the highest vibrations, most in contact with God. And by God, I don't mean any religious sense. I mean universal consciousness. It's the energy of consciousness that unites the entire universe together. So this is one way of depicting how reincarnation fits into this larger scheme. Another way of depicting it, which is similar to, comes from Theosophy, which in turn is based on the yogis and the Hindu traditions, that the lowest levels, the vibrational levels, would be the physical, like the earth, and our soul is depicted as having several layers in that level, and it has a physical level, it has an etheric level, it has a mental and an astral, and those layers enable us to sense and to function in this level of reality. But when we die and go into the astral plane. We drop the physical levels, and we move. You can see that as you move into the astral plane, you drop those outer shells, and you go in with a smaller core, which involves the soul, but involves information about some of the other things. But it's a lighter soul that has the crucial information that you carry from life to life. As you work through all of your emotional issues in that life, then you can even drop part of that uh, energy package as well and move into the lower mental and eventually into the higher mental and into the causal planes. These are the higher vibrations in the afterlife. At any point, you may go back down and reincarnate if you need other work or other lessons in the lower planes. And then there are also cycles that can occur over long time scales, as indicated in this picture here. So this is more the way that the great yogis and the adepts of the East would describe the reincarnation process. But it's pretty much compatible with the way George Meek was describing it and the way I've described it in my book. And it seems to be borne out by lots of reports from access with spirits in different methodologies. So that's kind of an overall schema as I understand it. And I think I'll leave it there for right now and see how we're doing for questions. I'll just close with my quote that I love from Albert Einstein: whoever undertakes to set himself up as a judge in the field of truth and knowledge is shipwrecked by the laughter of the gods. And by this, he just means that we're all trying to understand these deep, profound issues. And we're doing our best. And, we're limited in terms of what we can understand or comprehend, but we're all trying and we're all exploring. And that, to me, that's the most important thing. And as he says also, if we knew what we were doing, it would not be called research, would it? So I would just, and then my favorite quote, which you heard before, which is from Victor Hugo: all of the armies of the world are not as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And I do believe that we're now in an age when some of these deep issues are coming more clear and more available to people. So it's an exciting time to be alive and to be learning. So thank you very much, and we'll take questions if you have any.
From Jose Duenas: why did the dying people's souls need help, given that they have already decided to live the bomb experience?
The bomb experience. Well, I think what Michael Tamura is saying is that at some level, the soul has chosen that path on some high level, but our consciousness is on many different levels. We have the soul has multiple levels, and the physical body, we have different levels of knowledge. And for many people, when they die, their intellectual intellect is still functioning. What they've been taught, their expectations of what they think is going to happen next has been programmed into them by religious training, society, culture, etc. And that can interfere or be very confusing to them if what they see bears no relation to what is actually happening. I mean, typical cases, Monroe Institute teaches people to do soul rescue, where you enter an altered state and you enter the afterlife basically in a hypnotic or a very relaxed, partially hypnotic state. And you can make contact with spirits of beings that are trapped over there. Some people are trapped in the sense that they don't understand where they are. They don't understand what death is like or what to expect. They can't figure it out. The most common thing that happens has to do with what's called the etheric body. The etheric body is a layer of energy that acts as an interface between our soul and the physical world. And we have to drop that. We have to let go of that to enter the astral dimension, the heaven, essentially. But many people, when they die, they are scared. They don't believe there is an afterlife, or they have a certain expectation that there's supposed to be some pearly gates there, or maybe they feel like they don't deserve it. They have certain belief systems that will cause them to hold on to the etheric layer out of fear. And if they do that, then they never see the astral. It interferes with their ability to sense the astral dimension, even if it's all around them. So you're kind of caught between two different vibrations, and it's your own belief system, your expectations that are causing you to be stuck. So typically, the way soul rescue works is that in a relaxed state, you go out of body where you can access these dimensions. You communicate with that person, that spirit, and many times they don't know that they're dead. They still think they're alive, and they don't understand what's happening because they don't see the physical world, but they're still very confused. So you have to kind of explain to them what's happened and then help them to find a guide. There are guides, their own guides come down and try to help us to lead us across into the astral plane, into the realm of light. And so if you ask them to look around, they'll often see a being of light, an angel, or a person hovering nearby. And that person has been waiting for them to pay attention to help lead them across. But they can be stuck in between layers for thousands of years because time is not it doesn't really pass in the same way over there. So people in that state often, are confused about what to do, and that can interfere with their ability to shift their vibration and enter the higher plane. I'm not sure if it makes any sense or not, but one of the things that Michael Newton talks about, for example, other people as well, is that many spirits, when they die, they go to kind of a healing center, a reception area or a healing center that you pass through after you've just died, because your etheric body, your energy body is messed up by the traumas that you experienced in this lifetime or the traumas of your death. And you'll have to go through some healing work to adjust your vibration so you can now resonate with the astral plane and fit in there and feel comfortable there. In the book Nas Solar by Chico Xavier, for example, he describes the communications of a doctor, Dr. Andre, who died in Brazil, I guess, and communicated his story to Chico Xavier, famous automatic writer. And the Dr. Andre was trained in conventional Western medicine. And when he finds himself in the afterlife, one of the places he goes to is a hospital. Except he can't figure it out because they're using energy. What they're doing looks like Reiki, where the the spirit workers in the hospital are applying energy with their hands to help heal the energetic tears in his energy body, in his aura. So that's an example of the kind of thing that might be needed to heal someone, to prepare them to enter the afterlife. When you go through that healing process, then your vibrations can shift so they become synchronized with that particular plane of the afterlife, and then you become comfortable in that afterlife plane. Then you become able to perceive the beings who are in that plane, and now you feel like you're a part of it. And then as you do that, your perception of the old plane, the earth plane, fades away completely.
I was wondering if you've ever been regressed into a past life.
I have. Yep.
Yeah?
I have.
Did you want to share anything about that? Or
Well, I had a few. I guess my original reason for doing the regression was curiosity. I wanted to experience it and see what it was like. Um, there was nothing particular to heal that I was aware of. Um, and actually, I was led through several different past lives. Each one I would call kind of a snippet, like I was being given the fast economy tour or the overview, you know. But in each case, I was able to get several very vivid images of different lifetimes, and it felt real to me. And it was the after effects were interesting too. Um, the one that the one I'll talk about here was an Atlantis. There was an Atlantis lifetime that was late Atlantis. It was around 12,000 BC or so, about 12,000 years ago. So it was not too far, before the final sinking of Atlantis. But I was a technician in kind of a laboratory, and they were involved in producing energies that stabilized people and made you feel better. One way to describe it. And what I came away with from it, well, two things. One is I saw this device that other people have also seen. So the description really matches what other people have independently seen in that general time period. I also found that it seemed to sharpen my intuition about certain things. There were certain, I know this may sound kind of a cliche to say crystals, but there was a lot of specialized knowledge involving crystals, and I kept having ideas like inventions and insights after that regression that seemed to have been sparked by the regression. So that was kind of interesting. And I've had a few other regressions or other time periods, but I always worry about the mind, coming in, intruding, and affecting the session. In that particular session, I was so deep I could hardly talk, so it kind of felt very legitimate to me.
yeah.
But
yes.
So I mean, there's lots more there, but but that's. I love Dolores Cannon's books because she has so many past life regressions of her clients there, and you can get a real smorgasbord of different past lives and cultures by going through them.
Okay, another question. Susan Marfield is asking, where is a good resource for finding good quality past life regression practitioners.
Oh, boy.
I can think of one whom I recommend, who's presented several times for Caritas,
Okay.
is Linda Backman.
Okay, I've heard of her.
Yeah, and she has a website. Let me see if I can find it. It's something like Ravenheart or...
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, Ravenheart Center.
Mm-hmm.
Her email address is linda@ravenheartcenter.com.
Okay.
Um,
Is she in Fort Collins, or where is she?
no, she's outside of Boulder, although she travels a lot and has written a couple of books, and she's a psychologist,
Mm-hmm.
and she teaches past life recall.
Mm-hmm.
And I never had a session with her, but judging from her presentations at Caritas, I've been very impressed.
Interesting. Yeah. I know that Dolores Cannon's organization, of course, she passed away last year. Her organization was doing some teaching and some certification of people to use her method of past life regression. But I don't have enough experience with those people to know who I'd recommend. It's a good question. It would be nice to have a few that you trust that would be good to use.
Yeah. So Susan says, thank you.
Okay.
I don't see any more questions or chats. Yep. Don't see any more. But yeah, the movie about Jenny Cockrell.
Yeah.
You were talking about a documentary on ABC. I never saw that, but I'm going to look for it.
Okay. I think that may be the one that I saw, because I remember they had her actual children, grown up, of course, in the movie. And
yeah, well, in the documentary, maybe. The
Yeah.
movie was fictional. I mean, it was acted out.
Okay.
In fact, Jane Seymour played Jenny Cockrell.
Okay.
And Hume Cronin, wonderful actor, played one of the children, the oldest child.
Interesting.
They do have the whole reunion.
Uh-huh.
I read the book. The movie isn't exact, has some differences, but essentially it's the same story.
Mm-hmm.
They place her in a different place.
Mm-hmm.
She lived in England, and her memories were of Ireland. In the movie, she lives in the U.S. We have shown the movie at Caritas.
Okay.
And maybe we will again.
Yeah, if people want book recommendations, I mean, I found Brian Weiss's book, Many Lives, Many Masters, such a powerful book. And,
yes.
It's very succinct, but persuasive.
Yeah. And Michael Newton's book, too, Journey
Right.
to Pulse.
Absolutely.
Excellent book.
Yeah.
And right now, you were talking about Ian Stevenson, the person who succeeded him, who worked with him and then took over after Ian, retired and then eventually died, is Jim Tucker.
Uh-huh.
Also a child psychiatrist with University of Virginia, and whom we flew out here 10 years ago to give a talk. He wrote a wonderful book called Life Before Life, and now he's written a second book called Return to Life, which we are doing as a study group.
Great.
And anyone is welcome to join us. We're about halfway through the book, but doesn't matter because each chapter is a different case history. So it's interesting no matter where you pick up on it. You can join through the website. But it's fascinating. It's about children who remember previous lives.
Yeah. In fact, he was brought in on Christian Hauptmann, the little baseball player. He was brought in
yes.
on that one. So,
Uh, let's see. Susan Marfield asks, where is your current research taking you?
The next thing I'm trying to do is sort of pull together more of the science pieces. There's a lot of sort of scientific innovations and advances that are implied by this stuff, and I'd like to try to organize them better to see if how well our science can be adjusted to kind of accommodate these ideas. So right now in my books I do a lot of hand waving, and drawing cartoons, but I'd like to put some more solid science behind it if possible, or find solid science that does support it. So I'm kind of looking along in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Jose Duenas asks, will your books be available in Kindle?
I don't know. I haven't made any efforts in that direction. Maybe in the future. Right now, they're not. No current plans.
Okay.
I remain open. I remain open. I know there's some people who say your books are too heavy. We want Kindle.
Yeah, they are big.
Yeah.
Sandy Higgins asks or says, hi, thank you for this lovely discussion. Do you have any thoughts about the kind of institution of reincarnation, in quotes, that is organized in the Tibetan Buddhist Tulku tradition, where past lamas who have died, like the Dalai Lama, are regularly recognized as reincarnated?
I don't have any thoughts about it. I mean, clearly, spirits are real, and these spirits probably have a continuing interest in the subject, even when they're no longer with us. I was president for a while of an organization called Forever Family Foundation, and their board meetings have 6 living board members and 6 deceased members with mediums who come in to interpret what the deceased board members have to offer. So this concept of having people on the other side still contributing, I like it. It's a good idea, I think. If we, hopefully they're wiser, and there's no self-interest involved from coming where they're coming from. So it's an interesting idea.
Yeah. I don't see any more questions right now. Lorana mentioned Yesterday's Children is the name of the fictional movie about Jenny Cockrell. And
Okay.
that's what I was referring to, with Jane Seymour and Hume Cronin.
Great.
Yeah, so really it's good. It's well done, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it. So thank you so much, Claude.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Illuminating lecture. And see you next time.
Okay.
And thank you, everyone who attended and participated. Hope you enjoyed it. Check in with our website or email if you're on our email list. If you're not, you can join our email list and be notified of upcoming events.
Great. Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.